So we'll have 3 sounds of the bell, just bringing our focus back to our heart center. And when we listen to the Dharma talk, we want to listen from our whole being, not just from our intellect, which is obviously involved in it, but we want to feel the teachings resonate within the cells of our body. How does it really touch our lives, affect our being? If questions arise, they might be answered throughout the continuation of the talk, but at the end of the discussion, Ian will be happy to take questions if anybody has any questions at that time.
Good evening, dear friends. This year, Valentine's Day in 2013 falls on a Thursday. February the 14th is a Thursday, and this coincides with our gatherings at Pinegate. And this gives me a wonderful opportunity to offer the Buddha's teachings on love to you. And I love doing this particular teaching, because what it brings out is the tenderness of the Buddha. And it also brings out the universality of these teachings. And we'll see that we have a choice as we go through. Valentine's Day is a wonderful day for the captains of industry, making billions and billions of dollars. Whereas if we could celebrate every day as Valentine's Day, because we're developing love, compassion, joy, and equanimity within ourselves, then we can celebrate that every day. And the mindless consumerism that goes on February the 14th is based on a romantic view of love, straight out of Hollywood. It's full of attachment and it's full of illusion. And what I want to present to you tonight is an alternative to that. The Buddha's teachings, which are concrete, they're grounded, and there are progressive steps to take so that we grow day by day into a fuller and greater being. But let me start off with the tenderness of the Buddha. He talks about the 4 components of true love as the foundation for a loving relationship. And we'll see that this is solid and is concrete, and we can do it. It's not an illusion that we're trapped by. And the Buddha is taking great care, great pains, so that we can escape the traps of illusion by knowing what love, compassion, joy, and equanimity actually is and how to get there. And the reason we suffer and are miserable is because our hearts are small and our consciousness is restricted. And the Buddha gives a wonderful analogy about this. This was in a teaching he gave to the novice Rahula. And the Buddha put a handful of salt into a cup, and he asked Rahula if he could drink it. And Rahula said, "No, that would taste so awful." And the Buddha said, "That's right." Then he took another handful of salt and he threw it into a swiftly flowing river that they were standing next to. He said, "Could you put your cup in that river and drink it with that handful of salt?" And Rahula said, "Of course." And the Buddha gave him the meaning of this analogy. That if we can expand our heart consciousness to be as big and as powerful as a swiftly flowing river, then we won't be aggravated by grains of salt. We won't be reactive. Our heart has grown so big and strong that we don't sweat the small stuff or even the big stuff. We just are not agitated because we have expanded our mind. And the Buddha in this teaching gives us 4 avenues to expand our mind. Love, compassion, joy and equanimity. And he's very tender in the way he does this. And the universality of these teachings, when you consider how this teaching came into being, it wasn't delivered to his followers or to his monks. A Hindu Brahmin asked him, how could he be with Brahma when he dies? And the Buddha said, well, Brahma is the seat of love for you. And what you must do is practice developing the strength of love, compassion, joy and equanimity within your heart, and then you will be ready to dwell with Brahma. So this teaching was given to a Hindu gentleman, and it shows very clearly that this is a teaching, it's not reserved for Buddhism, it's not even about Buddhism. It applies to all faiths and traditions. And we'll come back to the universality of this teaching, and also to the story about Rahula. And the meditation on these 4 components. The Buddha said time and time again, any meditation on these 4 components of love are more powerful than all the other meditations put together. There's a power there that we will understand more. So the teaching on love is known as the 4 Brahma Viharas. Vihara means abode, the abode of Brahma. It's also known as the 4 immeasurable minds, because each one of these components is immeasurable, it's vast, and it connects to the other 3 components. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Buddha was very clear that if you want happiness, it's only possible if you've touched true love. And here he brings out the meanings of true love. And he's doing this so that we have the tools and the practices and the procedures so that we can heal the illnesses of anger. We can heal our sorrow and suffering, our insecurity. And he thought so much of this particular teaching. He said to his faithful attendant Ananda, Ananda, you must teach the young monks the 4 immeasurable minds, because that is their step into awakening. That's putting their feet on the path of enlightenment. Because as far as the Buddha was concerned, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, these are the attributes of an enlightened person. That's how you would describe an enlightened person. So Hollywood and its illusion about love doesn't apply here. We've got something much more concrete, much more substantial. And one thing that's also very clear in these teachings, it's an oxygen mask on an airplane. You put it on yourself first before you put it on the child next to you. These teachings you take and internalize for you first. And then you can extend it. Because you can't offer something that you don't have. So you have to develop this internally. And a very nice way in to the Buddha's teaching on love are the 4 mantras. And we'll do this before we come on to the substance of the teaching. Now, the first mantra in the practice of true love, and it's up on the flip chart that you can see, is, "Dear one, I am here for you." And you don't have to say this in your own language or your own vernacular. If you've got a teenage son and he says, "Yo, Mom," and flashes you the peace sign, he's saying that mantra perfectly and completely. That, again, is a mantra from a teenager. And if a teenager does something like that, what does Mom do? What does Dad do? You just fill up. You just glow. Because you know your kid is there for you. They might express it in a funny way, but he's just showing that he's there for you. And I'm thinking there's a teenage boy on this crescent who's really into rock and roll and heavy metal and, you know, the really hardcore music. And he knows his mum loves 60s and 70s music. So when he sees his mum coming up the path after a day's work, he switches off all his stuff and he finds a channel with soft 60s rock. So his mum comes in and she knows exactly what he's done. And she just blossoms. This is his way of saying, "Mom, I'm here for you." And it produces minor miracles. It creates harmony. It uplifts someone who's just finished a hard 8-hour shift. And it's a kind of a revolution. If we can say with great authenticity, "I am here for you." It makes a difference to the person who speaks it, and it makes a huge difference to the person who receives it. The second mantra. "Dear one, I know you are there, and it makes me very happy." This is along the same lines. Because what the speaker is encouraging to come into form is the blossoming of the other. And I use this in my garden all the time. I say this to the flowers, the vegetables, the bumblebees, the kids that come and help me weed, even when they pull up perfectly good plants. And you know, the kids who come and help me occasionally, they come back because they're appreciated. I know you are there, and that makes me very happy. And again, you don't have to use the words that I'm giving you, words that are natural to you and how you would express yourself. Then we come on to 2 more difficult mantras to say. If we can say, "Dear one, I know that you suffer, that's why I'm here for you." And we have to say this with our true presence. Otherwise we're intruding. If we can say that with our true presence, we're not offering psychobabble. We're not trying to solve anything. It's just, "I know you're upset. I know you're suffering. I know you're feeling miserable. But I'm here. And I'm here for you. No analysis is required." And when you can just, touch your friend or your relative on the shoulder, they know. They know it's true. They know it's real. And we say that particular mantra with all our mindfulness, with all our presence of being. And it penetrates and filters all the way through the resistances that we have because we don't really like people to know that we suffer. We always say, I'm fine. And we're dying inside. So something like that is a very, very powerful way of expressing oneself. The most difficult of these 4 mantras is the last one, number 4. It's where you say, dear one, I'm suffering. Please help me. How often can we say this? We daren't. And often there's very good reasons why we dare not. I call to memory a time many years ago when I was in lots of difficulties. One of my colleagues at Carleton University asked me on one day, Ian, how are you? And I didn't say I'm fine. I told him the truth. I was a mess. And as I was telling him just how awful things were for me, he couldn't have backed away more quickly. So when that happens, you realize you've got to be careful about who you say this mantra to. I'm suffering, please help me. Because there are so many obstacles in the way, mostly to do with pride, and that people really don't want to deal deeply with any form of suffering. But we have to overcome that pride. We have to overcome our wrong perceptions. And there's a wonderful story that Thich Nhat Hanh tells from Vietnam. It's about a young soldier who was called away to war. And he had a wife who was 6 months pregnant when he left for war. And he didn't come back until 3 years later. And she had a little boy. And she met her husband at the village gate, and they were overjoyed to see one another after all this time. And he asked his wife to go to the market to get flowers and fruit to make offerings to the ancestors of gratitude that they were reunited. So he's there at home with his little boy, and he asked his little boy if he would call him Daddy. And the little boy said, no, you're not my daddy. My daddy comes here every night. And when my mother stands up, he stands up. When my mother lies down, he lies down. On hearing these words, the young soldier's heart turned to stone. When his wife came home with the flowers and the fruit to make offerings to the ancestors, he wouldn't look at her. He made his own offerings, and he left. Spent his time in liquor bars, and he didn't come home. And with great suffering, after about 3 days, his wife couldn't take it any longer, and she threw herself off the bridge into the river, and she drowned. And after her funeral, he brought the little boy back home, and he lit the kerosene lamp in their little house. And his shadow was cast upon the wall. And the little boy said, that's my daddy. My mummy, every night when she lit the lamp, there would be my daddy standing next to her by the wall. And she would talk to him about how much she missed being away from him. And when she lay down, he lay down. Then the young soldier understood. How different it could be if the young soldier could have said to his wife, my dear one, I suffer. Please help me. Can you tell me what our son meant? Or she could say to her husband, my dear husband, why is it you look at me so terribly? Why has your heart turned to stone? I suffer so much. Please help me. We need a lot of courage to say, my dear one, I suffer. Please help. But think about it for a moment. If a dear one, a friend, or somebody said that to you, Could you turn away? I don't think so. If someone that you knew well came up to you and said, "My dear friend, I suffer. Please help." So that mantra is a difficult one, but it's probably the most powerful one. And it shows the consequences of being caught by wrong perceptions, by having attachments to outcomes that are only in your mind and not in reality. Now there are two keys to these 4 mantras on practicing true love, and it's the same keys that apply to the 4 Brahmaviharas. The first key is to be truly present, is to offer your full presence. And if you don't feel present, you then use a little handbell. Sound the bell once, listen to the call of the Buddha inside your heart, calling you to return home to your heart. When you are present, these mantras make sense. When you're present, the 4 components of the teachings on love make sense. Then you're there. You're there for the other person. You're there for the Dharma talk. You're there for your child. Once you bring your mind back into your body and you're present, things take on a different form. The other key, which is so important, is understanding. When you love, you offer your understanding, first of all. On Valentine's Day, you don't give roses to your loved one if she's allergic to them. You find out that she's allergic, and you buy her a beautiful orchid instead, which will last much longer than the roses. You have to understand. And offer your understanding first. But to understand the other, you have to investigate. And you investigate from a place of stillness, steadiness, and deep silence. But first of all, there's something you have to do before that. You've got to understand your own suffering and difficulties, first of all, before you can take it upon yourself to understand the suffering and difficulties of somebody you love. So we have to learn to internalize this very important teaching. Now let me come on to the teachings on love. Now turn the flip chart over. The first component of the teachings on love is Maitri, which means true love, but true love that's based on something different to that which Hollywood offers. The root of Maitri is Mitra in Sanskrit, which means friendship. But the whole basis of Maitri in the Buddha's view is the notion of friendship. And with true love, you offer joy and happiness to the other. But you have to have that joy and happiness for yourself first, before you can offer. You can't offer something that you don't have for yourself. And there are 2 things you have to consider. Is skillfulness. You're going to investigate the situation of the one you love. The likes, the dislikes. You have to come to an understanding, which means deep looking, deep listening, and you only have the capacity to look deeply and listen deeply if you're practicing mindfulness every day. And your deep looking and your deep listening, this is like a flower that comes out of the fertile soil of your mindfulness practice. Because what we have to understand, Romeo and Juliet is not a love story, although it's often billed as a love story. It's about galloping teenage hormones, wrong perceptions, and complete misunderstanding, which is great for the drama that Shakespeare turned it into, but it's not a love story. A love story takes skillfulness, takes understanding, and we have to develop our skillfulness. We have to develop our understanding. And above all, we have to upgrade the meaning of love. I love those burgers. I love sex. You know, we've kind of downgraded the meaning of love a little bit. So many people like to replace the word love with loving kindness, but I think love is a wonderful word. So let's upgrade it and realize that what's going on February the 14th of every year, Valentine's Day, is the degradation of true love for mindless consumerism. And I would like to offer something different. Why don't we make the development of Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, and Upeksha, that's love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Why don't we make this a daily habit and celebrate Valentine's Day every day? Because while we broaden our capacity, we're becoming more and more like that swift-flowing river with all the salt in it. You can drink from it because you've become that strong. The captains of industry have made billions and billions of dollars today. But have they moved true love along the scale? I don't think so. There may be a nice evening out once in a while, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's to see that the whole idea of love involved with Valentine's Day is for consumerist purposes. It's an illusion. What the Buddha offers is something concrete. That if you want to develop Maitri, you know that you have to develop skillfulness, you have to develop understanding based on mitra, on friendship. Not a passing attraction, or because this woman's got a beautiful figure or this man looks handsome. It's not a passing attraction, it's understanding. And having the skillfulness to look deeply and understand clearly. So there's work to do in developing Maitri. And I think love is a great word. It doesn't need to be upgraded. It just has to be restored to its proper place. And I think the Buddha does this with the basis on mitra, on friendship. Couples who stay together for a long period of time have not had a harmonious, happy Hollywood love affair from beginning to end. There's been bumps on the road. And the only thing that gets you past those bumps on the road is friendship. There's a deep friendship that is the ground of the relationship. Then you can survive disasters. You can survive the bumps on the road. You can survive the upsets and grow from it. So with Maitri, the Buddha is offering us practices, development of skillfulness, coming to a level of understanding by having the capacity to listen deeply, to look deeply. And this skillfulness, we had 3 of the sangha women who recently took a course in hospice care at the May Court. And they found it was just great because all that they had learned in Buddhism applied. Because one of the key points in hospice care was the capacity to listen deeply. And the 3 women from the sangha know about that because they have practiced sitting meditation, walking meditation, eating meditation, and deep listening comes naturally out of that practice. So skillfulness in deep listening depends on how rooted you are in everyday practice. And I was very, very proud of our 3 wonderful women in the sangha, because they were taking the practice from this meditation hall out into a hospice and finding that they were prepared and ready to do the deep listening that was required. So Maitri is the starting point in the 4 Brahma Viharas. The next one is Karuna. This translates roughly as compassion, which is not the best translation, but it will do. And Karuna is having the capacity and the intent to relieve and transform the suffering of the other. And again, you can see skillfulness and understanding apply. Because you can only have compassion, true compassion, when you expand your heart consciousness. When your heart consciousness expands, then you don't get caught in the suffering of the person you're caring for or trying to assist. Because it's so easy in the caring professions for people to burn out because they get drawn in to the suffering of their patients and their clients, and they become dysfunctional as a result of that. To avoid that, you expand heart consciousness. How? Skillfulness, understanding of practice. And what you're doing is an investigation. You have to be steady so that you can investigate what is the best thing that you can do for this person who is in extreme suffering. That's an intelligent use of your compassion. To be unintelligent means you get caught in their suffering, and you really can't do very much for them or for you. So again here we see that Karuna, the second component of the Buddha's teachings on love, it's a training in itself. This is an entire training with steps, concrete steps. And then we come on to Mudita, which is joy, which is the desire to bring joy to the other. And you can't do that unless you have a taste of joy within yourself. And bringing joy to another in a relationship is the total opposite of codependency. We've all been there at one time or another. And codependency, you say, I still love him, but there's this, and this. It's full of tears, woe, compromises, power, manipulation, you name it. Codependency is the opposite end of the spectrum to mudita. Mudita is the offering of joy. And it's the small things that give you so much joy. I'm thinking of the Dharma dog, Moksha, fast asleep on the couch behind Carolyn. Her joy infuses me with joy. It's unstoppable. I will be working at the computer, and she decides I've been working at the computer too long, and she'll get one of her squeaky toys, come, and she'll put it in my lap, which is a clear signal to stop and to play. And I just smile, and I just fill up with her joy. There's no barrier. I may have some other ideas of what to do, but she has no barrier. It's time to play. And sometimes, again, when I'm working too hard, she'll come and sit at the entrance of the meditation hall. Then she'll go and sit next to me by my desk. and she'll come back to the meditation hall and go back to the desk. So she's become my spiritual director as well, reminding me of when it's necessary to meditate. But one of the things about to bring home the essence of joy, how it's almost viral. When pure joy is there, it's viral. I'd like to tell you a story. It involves Carolyn's niece Crystal, when she was a little girl, she was injured in a car crash, and she had to be taken to hospital at the Children's Hospital in Ottawa, and her family lived in Westport. And we were very worried about whether she would slip into a coma or not. And this was a child who loved Christmas. So Carol and I thought we'd pay her a Christmas visit, but with a difference. I borrowed the red outfit and the white beard and had a sack over my hat, and I felt a total idiot. But we went to the Children's Hospital and we walked in, went into Crystal's room, and I did the ho stuff and rang a bell quite softly. And Crystal says, "Is that you, Uncle Ian?" There's no fooling this kid. And we had a nice talk to her. We had some presents, made her feel at home. She was so far from home. But the real epiphany about joy didn't happen that night with Crystal. Because seeing as that went off okay, I was on a roll. So next night was Christmas Eve, so I got all dressed up again and had a sack over my shoulder full of oranges and candy canes. I was visiting all the neighborhood kids, knocking on the door and doing the ho thing, still feeling like a complete idiot. I was walking across the street to another house, and it was one of those beautiful Christmas Eve evenings. There's about an inch of snow on the ground, and there's a soft snowfall, and through the cut at the corner of the crescent, a mum and her little child came through. And the little child, must have been about 3 or 4, she saw me, and she screamed, "Santa!" And she came charging down, and she slid right into my feet like somebody running for third base. And she looked up at me with these beautiful blue eyes and said, "Are you Santa?" What could I say? So I did my best Santa voice, and ho 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 and all this sort of thing. And I asked what her name was. Her name was Joanna, and she lived just around the corner. And I was asking him, "Well, how have you been this year?" She said, "Oh, I've been very good." And by this time her mum had come up behind her, and the mum became my ally, because I said, "What would you like for Christmas?" And Joanna said, "Oh, I really would like a doll's house." And Mum nodded like this, and I said, "I will see that you get one." We went through a few other things, and Mum was nodding, yes, so it was all right. Then she said, "I also want a bicycle." And I looked at Mum. It was a no from Mum. I said, "Well, you know, Joanna, maybe another year for a bicycle." And anyway, I couldn't get down the chimney with your bicycle. And she looked at me with a 4-year-old glare and put her hands on her hips like this and said, "Well, Santa, I can leave the front door open for you. You can bring the bike right in." And I said, "Not this year." And we carried on like this, and I gave her some stuff from the sack. And she told me where all her friends lived and how I had to go and see them too. But this child had totally infused me with her joy. I wasn't in the least bit self-conscious. I was Santa for a very brief moment. So that kind of joy, it's got a lot of peace, a lot of contentment. It's not the hyper excitement of a rave. Anyone in this audience been to a rave, or are you? One. One. Good for you, Wendy. It's a peaceful, contented feeling where there's no discrimination. There's just no barrier between you and the other. And this is what this child gave to me. So the many small things give us joy if we can allow them to. If we're not too busy, if we're not too caught up in writing our articles or doing our stuff. The small things are there to remind us. You know, the birds on the feeder. I called Carolyn the other day that she had to go outside and stick out her tongue because the snow was coming down so softly and gently, but she was too tied up in her law office, and she regretted that she had to miss this opportunity to stick her tongue out and taste one of these snowflakes. So there's so much joy everywhere, but we miss it because we're not present. And if we're not present for the Dharma dog, she insists. I once tested her to see how many times would she go from the doorway of the meditation hall to my desk. Would she get tired? She didn't. On the 10th time I said, okay, I'm yours. So with mudita, bringing joy to the other, it's a deep, peaceful joy. And there's no discrimination. There's no barrier. This brings me on to the final component of this teaching on love. I tend to think it's the most important one, that the first three arise out of this one. This is equanimity, non-attachment, non-discrimination. And it's the ground for love, compassion and joy to arise. Because what Upeksha is, it's the capacity to have a clear mind. So you see things as they are, not as you might paint them. And you have this sort of, equilibrium is the wrong word, but you have this kind of capacity not to be moved too much either way. Flattery and condemnation are the same. And with Upeksha, when you develop some kind of equanimity, you make the other three components of the Buddha's teachings on love always half full, never half empty. And what Upeksha permits is for you to enter the strong river. You're not moved too much. Little things are not going to aggravate you. Big things are not going to aggravate you. You've arrived at that kind of steadiness. And from that steadiness you can recognize love. You can recognize compassion. You can recognize joy. So Upeksha is very, very important. There's no confusion when you've developed equanimity within you. You're not confused. Wisdom prevails. You don't make quite so many mistakes. And when you make them, you know immediately that you've made a mistake. And you're not in denial about it. And the idea of Upeksha, of equanimity, is the key to interbeing. All four components of the Buddha's teachings in love dovetail one to another. But I think the development of Upeksha really accelerates the other three immeasurable minds. Now I'd like to tell you a story where equanimity was not there. Upeksha had gone on holiday to bring home what the lack of equanimity looks like. I'm thinking back to the early days of Pine Gate Sangha. There's one Sangha evening I'd prepared a talk, cleaned the house, cleaned the meditation hall, meditated beforehand. 7 o'clock, nobody turned out. But, oh, they're just a little bit late. 7:30, nobody here. So, where the heck is everybody? Then I realized I was really getting miffed. I was quite disappointed that nobody had showed up. After all this preparation, nobody shows up. Then I noticed these two creatures. The Dharma dog that preceded Upeksha, her name was Nikki, and Lady the cat, who was a beautiful creature. They were sitting right in front of me in the meditation hall. And they were present. It was me that was not present. When I saw them, I just kind of smiled. Then I investigated. Okay, what was disappointed? What was miffed? My ego was certainly miffed. My expectations had not been met. And what was missing, in large measure, was equanimity with a capital E. So, my two Dharma pets sat right in front of me, and I did the meditation on the 4 Brahma-viharas with a special emphasis on the section on equanimity, because that was what I was lacking at that moment. And at the end, I felt much better. And this shows how we operate. We fill up when we recognize and do the appropriate practice. For instance, if we're angry, we use our mindfulness and we use the practice of walking meditation to take care of it. If we have cravings and desires, we use our mindfulness to do a letting go meditation. Or if we've got lots of anxiety coming up, we use the So Hum meditation to take care of it. And you calm. And every time you do that, you're becoming a bigger and bigger river. Because what was bothering you is no longer bothering you. You've done the work. You've expanded into this broad river. Your equanimity is building. And if your equanimity is building, so is your love, your compassion, and your joy. So every time you practice when there's a crisis or a distress in your life, and then you feel that peace and calm, yeah, I've dealt with this. I'm feeling calm. You can handle the grains of salt in the river without reaction. So, what we have to do with this teaching, let's have a reality check. What have we got here? We've got 4 concrete, grounded practices, so that we understand love in terms of 4 components. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And if your love doesn't have those 4 components, it's not love. It's something else. And it's something else that's more than likely illusory and won't last. But if you have cultivated these 4 components of the Buddha's teachings on love, you're like that big strong river. You can accommodate things that otherwise would aggravate you. It doesn't bother you so much. And sometimes it doesn't bother you at all. So when we do the reality check, oh, I'm still suffering, that is simple. It means we have still got a small heart. We have not expanded our heart. This teeny tiny thing. And we've got to make it huge so it extends beyond us. If we're strong, we can withstand wrong accusations based on ignorance and hate. I think President Obama has to be here in terms of the task that faces him with people who give so much vitriol his way based on ignorance and hate. And I was thinking about President Obama hoping that he's here in the strong place of expanding his heart. So with these 4 concrete proposals, the Buddha is giving us a design, and his challenge is work. Are you prepared to do the work? Are you prepared to be mindful and apply a specific tool? And there are countless tools and concentrations in Buddhism. The one I use mostly is walking meditation. Because if I'm distressed or agitated, it's very hard for me to sit down and meditate. But I can walk, and I can think of what's bothering me, and I can walk that energy out through my feet into the ground. So we have concrete practices. We have a step-by-step progress in each one of these 4 components. Which leads me to the conclusion that from now on, every day will be Valentine's Day. It will be a celebration of the work we have done to develop Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, and Upeksha. And what a celebration every day would be. The captains of industry would not benefit, but never mind that. And I think this is concrete. It's doable, and it's a challenge. The Hollywood version of love, celebrated on Valentine's Day, is illusory. It's full of attachments and wrong perceptions, and that will inevitably lead to suffering. This leads to joy and liberation. Remember what the Buddha thought about this particular teaching, because it's really very simple, very straightforward, but it is profound. This is one of his strongest teachings in his view. This is why he insisted that Ananda teach this to the young monks so that they can step onto the path of awakening and walk as an enlightened being. So this Valentine's Day, I offer you the Buddha's teachings on love. And I hope you will share my preference. Thank you.